after doing an entire show on his own, of course. It is our friend Thom Hartmann, host of the Thom Hartmann program, which you can hear on this very channel, from noon to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. New York Times best-selling author, has a great Substack, Hartmann Report, hartmannreport.com. My monologues are just me reading his articles out loud, folks. No, I'm kidding. And he's got a brand new book coming out tomorrow, The Last American President. That's right, tomorrow, The Last American President. Buy Tom's book. You have to buy it. That's how it works here. Tom, nice to see you, my friend.
Hey, Dean, thanks for inviting me on. It's always nice talking with you.
Sure. And congratulations on the new book. One day I might write a book of my own. I like writing
You
articles
should.
a lot. That's the
Yeah.
thing. I've done some proposals in the past, but let's talk something good. So Jimmy Kimmel going back on air. It's not like the Republic is saved, but it is an important step because the Trump regime, through Brendan Carr, demanded Jimmy Kimmel be suspended or they were going to investigate. So they threatened the use of state action to silence speech. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and most of MAGA cheered it. They loved it. They were really happy about this. And now ABC has defied Trump by putting him back on air. So what's your reaction? Is there a lesson that you take from this?
Yeah, money talks. I mean, this morning Howard Stern went on SiriusXM, where you and I both are right now, and publicly canceled his Disney subscription. I did too while I was on the air this morning on my show.
Wow.
And it's just I frankly, I didn't even realize I had a Disney Plus subscription until I went and logged in. And it's just like, yeah, and it's not just us. I mean, obviously, lots and lots and lots, and their stock was down $3 billion, and and everybody was coming out and saying, no, you can't do that. This is just wrong. Maybe I don't know if it was the threshold or not, but I think maybe kind of one of the dam breaking points was when Ted Cruz and Rand Paul came out and said this is wrong. I mean, Ted Cruz has a regular podcast that I think he monetizes pretty well. Rand Paul is, frequently in the media, and I think he has a podcast. I'm not certain. And so, they get it that, if the new rule is that the government can shut you down if they don't like your content, wait until there's a Democrat in the White House.
But probably a Democrat wouldn't do that. But yes, I agree that that's
Correct.
the message. So what about getting at the essence of this is that it was the people power.
Yeah,
People actually did
exactly.
something. People
Yep.
talked about canceling Disney Plus and Hulu, which is also a Disney company, and not going to Disney parks and that kind of stuff, where it actually became, it transcended just the liberal bubble. Like it got out there into the ether, and people were alarmed, I think, by the heavy-handed action of the Trump regime. Like it wasn't plausible deniability. It wasn't like Colbert, where there was a merger going on, and the FCC didn't say we did this. Brendan Carr point blank said, you can do it the easy way, you can do it the hard way. And we're going to come for you if you don't suspend Jimmy Kimmel. Point blank saying that kind of stuff. So heavy-handed,
Yeah.
so drunk on power. It was undeniable. I think that's the jarring nature. I think it's very important that we know our power. People are happy today. I'm glad to see this.
I, I also think it's an important moment. I wrote about this last week in Hartmann Report that, you know, going over to the UAE and, getting $2 billion put in his private company in exchange for giving them high-tech chips that it's illegal to give to them, taking basically, Trump taking bribes. That's so esoteric. The average American has no idea. Broke through the media bubble. Hawk and Tesla's from the White House. That's, the Hatch Act is 2 years in prison, but most people don't have any idea. But everybody knows Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, even people who don't like him, Jimmy Kimmel. But he's also very likable. I mean, he's kind of a middle of the road guy. He's not some, flaming liberal. I mean, he's clearly not happy with Trump, but I think you can be in the middle and not be happy with Trump. And so, the piece that I wrote a week ago, when this happened, was that they just stepped in it. This is a cultural touchstone moment. This is the moment when all of America suddenly goes, he's doing what? He's shutting down comedians? I mean, that's what Putin does. Are you serious? By the way, I'm increasingly believing that Trump is actually literally getting direction from Putin. I asked ChatGPT the other day, can you give me a timeline of Trump-Putin conversations by telephone or in person, followed within days or at most a week with major Trump initiatives to reduce democracy. And it gave me a list.
Wow.
Yeah.
They got to ban ChatGPT. That can't happen. That's not allowed anymore. That's ridiculous.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really good
just
stuff. It's interesting. You wrote an article for your Substack that the oldest warning sign, how history links the death of comedy to the death of democracy, and you cited about Goebbels, which they were called witticisms, but they were jokes about the Nazis and how. And I've gone on in the show in the past. I've performed comedy in the Middle East where there were dictators, and the rules were no jokes about the leader. And the idea
exactly.
being that if you're some kind of dictator, you want to be feared. You don't want to be laughed at. The last thing you want people mocking you and laughing you. It takes your power away. So share a little bit why the oldest warning sign is the death of comedy linked to the death of democracy.
Well, comedy has a special place in the history of, I was going to say Republican democracy, but really just in the history of modern civilization. Back in medieval times, the only person, and you know this well as a comic, the only person who could tell the truth about the king to the king was the court jester. And the
Right.
reason was really, there's a very important reason for this, and that was that the king knew that he was surrounded by people who were terrified by him, or of him, and he was never going to get the truth from them about what the people were really thinking. And so the court, there had to be one person who had a license, who had permission, who couldn't be killed for telling the king what people were actually saying. And he had to figure out a way to do it that was funny, so it kind of softened the blow. But
Hmm.
the king needed to know that. Comedy is really important in a society. It's the way that we deal with the things that frighten us. Very often, as again, you could be giving this lecture, right, as a comedian,
Please.
but and the topics that are the things that we would otherwise not be comfortable talking about, or we're afraid of, or we don't want to go near, or it's just it's just so incredibly important and so powerful. And try and that's why, and I think everybody, most people probably don't know that at that level of history and whatnot, but I think most people intuit it. They know
Sure.
that comedians are the truth tellers of our day. And people don't want their truth tellers taken away.
And it's interesting you say that because Greg Gutfeld on Fox News, who has that show at night, which they call comedy, they should put it in quotes. It's
I've
not
never
comedy,
seen
it's
it.
an insult. Right? It's terrible. But the point is, he defended Jimmy Kimmel being taken off air because he's not a comedian. He was a late night, he was a pundit, and they gave him a show, and then it morphed into a comedic show where he actually has some comedians who sit around him and do some jokes. But he's not cut from the comedian's cloth because every comedian, even right leaning comedians, even some of the right podcasters, the bro guys who helped Trump, were very upset about this, and
Yeah.
because they understand freedom of speech and they understand how dangerous it is in instinctively that we understand and get that. So I agree with the comedians can play that role. That's why performing in the Middle East, I knew at some point there would be a push up against the powers that be because comedy is inherently defiant, and in its own way, it's always, if you're a real comic, you're going to challenge the status quo. You're always going to do it. That's why it's not that many right-wing comedians. Right-wing comedians want the status quo. It's hard to do jokes about wanting the status quo.
Yeah.
Comedians tend to want to push for change and progress, and they envision a nation a different way, and their comedy matches that. It's not that much funny to go, hey, I can't wait till they overturn Roe v. Wade and women get oppressed and lose control of their bodies, huh? Tip your
Yeah.
waitresses, folks. I'll be here all week. Doesn't really work that well. That's the kind of stuff you'd have.
Well, and the whole right-wing shtick is essentially, based in hate and fear. And hate and fear don't do well in comedy.
Not in a real comedy club. I guess if everybody's afraid in the audience, they might laugh a lot. Like, oh, ha, 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 funny! You're the funniest guy ever. It's not. It's not real comedy. So, I think it's interesting that Kimmel's back. Everyone's going to look forward to see what he says tomorrow night,
Oh yeah.
and I'm looking
What do you
forward
want to
to.
bet he's going to do like Jon Stewart did and spend his entire show talking about how wonderful Donald Trump is?
I think he would have if John didn't do it. And Fallon did a version of it, not the same, but he did a little bit of that. Ed
Yeah.
Colbert did his old character from the Colbert Report. So I think Jimmy's going to have to do something more original, whatever it might be.
Yeah, it would seem
And
derivative.
at this point it would because it's too obvious. So, I mean, he could come out and come out very like, thank you, I'm here. Like, he could do something funny for a minute and get a laugh. It'd be funny. If he did a long commitment to it, then you're not going to do better than Jon Stewart. Jon was just too good at that. John's really smart. So,
Yeah.
Jimmy's smart too. I don't know Jimmy personally. Jon, I knew a little bit.
Are you
But
still doing comedy, Dean?
right now, Tom, this is what I do. This is, no, I do a few
You don't
songs.
occasionally go off on a weekend and
I
do a
do,
comedy club or
I,
something?
not for a weekend like that. Not like, Pete Dominic or some other people who are my buddies do it. But I'll do a spot a week here in the city, sometimes 2 spots. And then I produce the Arab American Comedy Festival, which is our 22nd year coming up in the fall. So I do that. And still I produce this thing called the Big Brown Comedy Show probably 3 times a year. So I still enjoy, there's nothing more thrilling in life for me than writing a new joke and going on stage and it gets a good laugh. And it's about something that you feel that it's important. I mean, I go on once or twice a week. I do a lot of jokes about where we are as a nation and Trump and stuff like that. And sometimes they get laughs. Sometimes the newer stuff doesn't. But you're always trying. That's the beauty of comedy. So I'll try.
You should come to Portland. I'd love to hear you.
If I can go, I'll go. I used to do comedy in Portland. I did Portland State University. I did some other shows in Portland, and then Seattle. We do the 2 shows back to back, 2 cities back to back. I'm chatting with our friend Thom Hartmann. So Tom, let's talk about TikTok here, and this is the Viktor Orban model of having the wealthy oligarchs who support the leader buy up legally the means of communications. And that's what Viktor Orban did in Hungary. And now we learned TikTok's going to be controlled. The algorithm will be controlled by a company headed by Trump-supporting Larry Ellison from Oracle, whose son is the head of Skydance, which they want to buy. They have CBS now, and they want to buy potentially Warner Brothers. And other people on the board, Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch might be on the board. They're going to turn TikTok into a pro-Trump, pro-Republican platform.
Just like, the question in my mind is Larry Ellison really in favor of fascism? Does he really love Trump and his son, David? Or is this just what you have to do? I mean, when you remember when this is just like Tim Cook was sitting, I believe it was maybe the week before, Tim Cook was sitting next to Trump with all those tech guys in DC, and they're all sitting around the table and they were all telling Donald what a wonderful man he was and what a great leader he was. And, we're so grateful to you. And that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, thinks that's complete horseshit. I mean, you just know it, right? And yet they're doing it. And so the question in my mind is, when Trump is gone, are these guys still going to be tilting their algorithms that way? Are they still going to be kissing the ring, or do they really, or will they revert back to at least the mean, at least back to some kind of neutrality? But I would love to see ultimate legislation repealing Section 230, or at least modifying it to the point that the algorithms have to be publicly published. They have to be open source.
Wow, that would be very interesting if that were to happen. Look, I mean, I think we all get you have Zuckerberg and Tim Cook and others sitting around and praising Donald Trump, and they do it because they think it's good for business. But and I'm not suggesting you're saying that's defensible. They are still complicit by doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's for business reasons or because you agree with the guy. And perhaps if you don't agree with him, you're more of a scumbag because you were validating a guy that you actually disagree with. At least if you're a real fascist that made a lot of money like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, that's a little different. I don't like them or respect them. But
I think that's why.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's why South Park parodied or ridiculed Tim Cook. Because it was just so obvious what he was doing. Here's a piece of gold, and you're so wonderful, and come on.
It's unbelievable. I'm chatting with our friend Thom Hartmann, whose new book, The Last American President, comes out tomorrow. We'll talk about it in a minute. I want to touch on a few other things. One is, I'm not sure if you saw the clips from the Charlie Kirk Memorial. I was going to talk about it today, but I wanted to open with the Kimmel thing because it was very, very exciting. Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, really called for forgiveness, literally said she forgive the killer. And there's Donald Trump literally contradicting her right after she spoke. Sorry, I can't agree with that. I hate my enemies. I hate the Democrats or political opponents as enemies. He wishes them ill. Stephen Miller said that an army had been awoken. How do you think they're going to use Charlie Kirk's death going forward?
I think this is probably going to fade fairly quickly.
Really?
Because he's not around any longer. I just don't think it's going to do the whole horse vessel thing. I mean, maybe they can pull it off. You know who Horst Wessel was, right? And didn't I tell you that story about my friend who touched the banner with Horst blood on it?
You may have. That sounds familiar because no one else ever told me that ever in my life. So I'd have to
Yeah.
imagine it was you
When I
that said
was
that because
when I was
it
living in
rings a bell.
Germany, I knew this guy, Gottfried Mueller, who had been in Hitler's intelligence service. And after the war, he just completely reformed. He started communities for orphans, all across Germany, war orphans, and then all around the world, and started this incredible nonprofit that I worked with for years.
Wow.
And he told me that when he was first, brought into the Nazi Party as an officer in the military, he at one of these kind of Nuremberg rally kind of things, Hitler held this banner, a Nazi a swastika with fringe on it, and it had blood on it, and it was Horst Wessel's blood, and they all had to line up and go up and touch it and say, "I swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler." And
Wow.
um, and the Horst Wessel song is illegal to even whistle in Germany. I mean, you can go to jail for just,
Now it's again. Now that's how banned it is, or you can't even.
yeah, yeah. Seriously, I lived there for a year. You do not sing the Horst Wessel song, and you just don't do it.
That's amazing.
And
Yeah.
because he became, he was their martyr. He was very much a martyr. But the other thing that flipped me out about yesterday's whatever you want to call that thing, tribute to Charlie, deification of Charlie Kirk, was Stephen Miller. Go over, look at it. I don't know. Do you get Jim Stewartson's newsletter, Mind War?
I don't. I don't think so. It doesn't ring a bell.
Mind-war.com, and it's really worth
Okay.
subscribing to. I've had Jim on the program a couple times. The Sturmabteilung, the SA, their name Sturmabteilung. Sturm means storm, right? So they were the storm troopers, and Goebbels gave multiple speeches, but one of his most famous speeches is called "The Storm Is Upon Us." And
Wow.
Stephen Miller was, as far as I could tell, and Jim Stewartson has got like 5 or 6 of these quotes where it's Stephen Miller and then Joseph Goebbels, Stephen Miller, Joseph Goebbels, Stephen Miller, Joseph Goebbels, all just one paragraph each, and it's like he plagiarized the speech from Goebbels, and he was
What?
talking about the storm is rising and the storm is upon us and we are the storm and we are going to conquer evil, and I mean it was
Hmm.
just Joe Goebbels blow by blow. And that's really concerning. That's
That
really
Malcolm Nance has called Stephen Miller Baby Goebbels for a long time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean, for years, for
Pee
the
Wee
first time.
German.
Uh, so yeah, it's interesting that he did that. That's I have to go take a look at that because it
Yeah,
was language that was not normal. It wasn't a normal cadence or construction. It
yeah.
seemed like he was doing something, and he kept repeating, "They're nothing. They've done nothing. They are nothing." And like this, and the crowd begins to cheer. I'm like, this guy's doing something here. And I didn't know. I'm not surprised at all that it's copying a Nazi speech. That it sounds like exactly right up Stephen Miller's uh, playbook, the kind of stuff that he
Yeah.
subscribes to. He is a white supremacist, although I don't think he would have done well in Nazi Germany. I think he's Jewish, isn't he? Like,
He
but
is. Yeah.
still, he adheres to
There
this
were Jews who helped
right-wing.
out Hitler, at least in the early years.
Wow. Well, Miller
Yeah.
would have been one of them. So you got that going on. What do you make of, over the weekend, Donald Trump in writing puts on social media, Pam Bondi, we need you. I have reviewed 30 statements and posts, same old story, all talk, no action. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia James, literally calling for people to be prosecuted? And I don't even think in dictatorships they do that. They just tell the person, go get them. Trump is doing it publicly. What do you think that's to just scare other people? Because you don't have to do that. You can tell Pam Bondi, you shouldn't be doing that, of course, but it's a norm, and norms mean nothing now in the time of Trump. We know that. But he did it publicly for a reason and then doubled down on it when asked about it. What do you think that end game is there?
I read it, and it doesn't read like his typical public screeds. I think he meant for it to be a DM, a direct message,
Hmm.
a confidential me to you, Pam, because it starts out Pam, and if he was making a public statement, he would just, he would be one step back from that. He would, as he has done so many times, where that he's really trying to tell one of his people, I want you to do this, but he doesn't come out and say it. So I think that was supposed to be a private message. And then, once it got out, of course, everybody had to go, oh yeah, dear leader never makes mistakes. That was not supposed to be a private message. But I don't see any other way to read it. What do you
That's
think?
very interesting that he may not have meant that part to be public, but he's talked about prosecuting people. When you just said dear leader, it reminded me. So I'm reading this book, Spin Dictators, like spin doctors, but spin dictators, and it had
Mhm.
something that I saw also in another book, and I went back and looked at it. And the book was written in 2022. It wasn't about MAGA. It was about other right-wing movements through time, and it referred to them as secular religions. And I thought that was very
Mhm.
interesting. And that's what, to me, cult is fine if you want to use it. But really, secular religion seems to be more the appropriate thing in that the articles of faith come from the leader. And this is the religion you must adhere to and pray to and honor him. And like a religion, you might not agree with everything. You're not going to leave it because you don't agree with every part of it. But you like enough of it that you stick around and you defend it and you might even die for the religion. It seems like, have you heard that term before? Does that resonate with you?
I, I have and it does, and I think it's a pretty good description. Although I think cult is a word that everybody understands, and
Right, right. I understand.
increasingly MAGA is appearing to be a cult. I mean, it just looks like a cult to me. So
Well, I don't know what you decultify, de-secular religion thing. I don't know if they find another religious leader. How worried are you about J.D. Vance? Because, there was part of me that thought he's a little different. And then when he guest host for Charlie Kirk last Monday, and I played some of the clips, I found it chilling. Like I found it was a different level of, like it was like something you'd see in a newsreel in the future about a really dark, despotic leader. Like it was something there. I had not heard that tone before from JD, and I'm like, he's a frightening figure. Like I really was deeply concerned by him.
yeah, I think he and Stephen Miller are whipping each other up, and probably Don Jr.'s in that mix. Um, I used to think that JD was a very smart guy, and now I think he's kind of an average guy who's an incredible opportunist, um, and is
Fair.
driven by bigotry. And he just, he knows what to say, to again, keep in mind, he's talking to a cult. He
Right.
was talking to the cult, in fact. And so he was using, the plain cult language. And you don't defy cult leaders. One of my best friends was Ted. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Ted Patrick. Back in the 80s when people in the 70s when people were joining the Hare Krishnas and stuff like that.
I've heard of Hare Krishnas, but I didn't know
Yeah.
Ted Patrick.
Ted Patrick was very, very famous. He was a deprogrammer, and he used to kidnap
Oh,
people. He kidnapped a
wow.
couple of really famous, children of very famous people. I don't know if Patty Hearst was ever one of them, but and my friend Hilly Zeitlin was, his right-hand guy for a while. And I've heard some just wild stories, but mostly, I mean, my friend is a psychotherapist now, and a rabbi, and he the power of cults is just incredible. I mean, the effort that it takes. We had long conversations. This was like 20 years ago about, what does it take to deprogram somebody, to break somebody out of a cult? Because what cults do is they literally alter your perception of reality. They give you a filter that you have to view the entire world through. And that's what Trump is doing. That's what JD Vance is doing. That's what Stephen Miller is doing. It's frankly what Fox News does. And in fact, I think if you want to talk about a secular religion, that Fox News is probably, closer to that and a little less cult-like, although, it has cult aspects, but a little more so maybe under Roger Ailes. But yeah, I get it. I'm
What
very,
did your friend? What did your friend Ted Patrick? You said. What
he,
did your
he
friend
worked for
say?
Ted Patrick.
Oh, if it, what was the way? Was there any? I'm sure there's not like a silver bullet, but was there a way they actually got people out of a cult and decultified them? Is that the right
Yeah,
word?
there were a couple of steps, and keep in mind I'm running off maybe a 30-year-old memory, but although I still talk to him regularly, they would physically kidnap somebody. First of all, you've got to get them out of the cult,
Okay.
and then they would basically challenge every single position that they hold. I mean, it was a fairly brutal process, actually, and kind of try to break them back down again. Because what cults do is they break you down and then they build you back up. They convince you that everybody's out to get you, that you've been the victim, that you've been ruined, that you are, that you are sad and pathetic, and we're going to turn you into a real man, and we're going to, give you spiritual insight, and we're going to turn you into one of us we are the overlords, we are the Übermenschen, we're the only ones who know the true secrets, we're the only ones who understand how everything works. And so you've got to shatter that. And so that was step one, or step two, I guess. And then step three was to bring in their families and try to reestablish the original relationships that they had with family, so that because once you've lost what you're bonded to, you've got to have something else to bond back to. And that's bringing people back to family. So
That's
fairly
interesting.
straightforward process. This book's been written
We
about.
have to have our eye on a few people from the MAGA cult that we have to kidnap first, legally, and then try to we're going to see how that works. One last thing, then we're going to talk about your book. Look, you've been writing a lot, like I have, about the fascist playbook, the tyrant playbook. Where do you think Trump goes next?
Well, if Trump is actually taking advice from Putin, um, then I think the place he goes next is World War III.
Oh,
And that's typically what people do when they're backed into a corner. I mean, in a small way, that's what Thatcher did when the coal miners union, turned on her, and she did the Falkland War. It's what Reagan did when the Marines died in the Beirut bombing. He cut and run, but a week later he invades Grenada to shift the news cycle. Then George Herbert Walker Bush had his little war, his little 3-day war in Kuwait. Against Iraq. And then George W. Bush, you'll recall, a year before he became president, told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, who was ghostwriting his autobiography, A Charge to Keep, told him that if I become president, I'm going to have a little war in Iraq, because only I'm not going to make the mistake my father did of only doing it for 3 days. I'm going to run it right up to the next election, because that's how you get elected. You become a wartime president. It's what Hitler did when he was getting in trouble. He invaded Poland, which is what kicked off World War II. And I see Trump right now lining up Venezuela for conflict. Number one. Number two, you'll recall in July, Mark Rudd, the head of NATO, came over to the White House and met with Trump. Trump was refusing to send anti-aircraft missiles, Patriot missiles, to Ukraine, I believe at the instruction of Putin. And so Rudd said, cool, sell them to us, and we'll take the ones that we already have and we'll just give them to Ukraine. So the European countries over the last 2 months have given hundreds and hundreds of these air defense systems to Ukraine. They don't have any more. I mean, or they're down. Their stockpiles are depleted badly. And Trump this week announced that, or the White House this week announced that they're not going to replenish those European supplies. So Europe is now naked. And as this is happening, literally in the same time this is happening, Putin has now broken NATO barriers, airspace in Romania, in Poland, and in Estonia. And he's doing a major social media-based propaganda war against Finland right now, which shares an 840-mile border with Russia and has been invaded twice by Russia in 1939 and 39 and 41, if I'm remembering right. So the scenario that I see is Trump starts his little war with Venezuela. Putin says, okay, that's it. He starts seriously bombing Kyiv, maybe even with a tactical nuke, but probably just massively bombing Kyiv, and says, that's it, I'm taking them. And then also penetrates the eastern borders of probably Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland. He'll pick one first, just to see what NATO does. They're not going to go nuclear on either of them. This would be conventional warfare. And at that point, Xi says, okay, the world is going into flames. I'm going to take Taiwan. And Trump has already said he won't defend Taiwan, or implied it strongly. And then at that point, Netanyahu says, perfect moment to bomb Tehran, and starts actually bombing, civilian sites in Tehran rather than just nuclear reactors. And boom, you've got an entire war, an entire world in flames. The last time this happened was 80 years ago, World War II. You and I have talked about the 80-year cycles of history before. If Putin was advising Trump, and I believe he is, that's probably what he would tell him to do, is start a war with Venezuela.
That is a very scary scenario. I appreciate you sharing it so that we're not surprised, which is important. But the
I hope I'm
incursions
wrong.
into NATO airspace by Putin, it's a blatant lack of respect for Trump, or Trump's on the same page. They're allies. I mean, or it could be both.
Yeah.
But it's remarkable. And any other American president that was actually a patriot would be denouncing Putin, not saying, "Oh, I'm disappointed." I don't care about your fake emotional state. We have the biggest military in the world. You could say that we're going to defend airspace on the edge of Estonia, however we want to do it, Poland, whatever it might be. You can do more. And he'll come to the UN tomorrow. Trump literally, I think, is speaking tomorrow at the UN. And he'll defend Netanyahu and say something about Ukraine. It should be over. They hate each other. It's why there's no deal. He won't say anything bad about Putin other than little things like, nothing.
So, a question, Dean. In their meeting in Alaska, their private meeting, do you think that Putin, there's no doubt in my mind that, and I'm guessing you think the same, that Putin went to that meeting trying to basically figure out what his next step was going to be and how much Trump would let him, how far Trump would let him go, or came to that meeting to give Trump instructions? And that's the question in my mind is, did he go to measure the man and concluded that Trump was a wimp and was not going to help out? And that's why we saw like a 400% increase in the number of missiles that were striking Ukraine the day after actually it was the last day of that meeting in Alaska. Or did Putin go and tell Trump, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jack up this war in Ukraine. You are not going to stop me. You are not going to sell defensive weapons to Europe. And do we have an understanding here, Don? Which do you think happened?
Well, I think the idea of going to meet Trump in person where there's no one listening on a phone call or no one reading what's been written is very important, right? So they can speak to each other with nobody recording it. And it's like a spy movie. Like you would do that so that you can communicate without any kind of concerns. I think there's another element too. Donald Trump, if you remember, looked awful in Alaska, like physically awful, exhausted, not well. I think Putin saw that too as a human being, just a former KGB guy sizing up his opponent, going, this guy doesn't have what it takes. If he even wanted to be tough, he can't do it anymore. So
You're right.
Where's Trump? Trump's alliance, his allegiance involving Putin has always been questionable with all of us from the beginning, from the earliest days. Remember Hillary Clinton, 2016? He wants a puppet. Putin wants a puppet. No puppet here. You're a puppet. Yep. In Russia, can you find the emails, all that kind of stuff? Everything. We've had so many questions about the allegiance of Donald Trump. So I don't want to speculate in that I need some bit of evidence. My gut feeling is that Putin has no respect whatsoever for Donald Trump. Saw a man who was pale and knows might not be here for a long time. J.D. Vance becomes president. J.D. Vance will just give Ukraine up tomorrow. I mean,
He's already said that. Yeah.
Right, no concern for NATO, whatever. He's concerned. I don't know what he's concerned with. So
he wants a
deal was made, or it was something where I could see Putin saying to him, here's what I'm going to do. What are you going to do? And Trump was very disappointed. Remember, he went up there and said, whoa, there's no deal. I thought we have a deal. I'm sure Trump was willing to sacrifice something. He was going to be the Neville Chamberlain of our time, and ended up, Putin probably offered nothing. Like, none. Yeah. I want Ukraine. So, before we run out of time, tell us about your new book. Thom Hartmann, we're chatting with. His new book comes out tomorrow, The Last American President. And next time you come on, we'll talk about it in great detail. But I'd love you to share because it's the eve of it coming out, so people can buy it online tonight.
Sure. Yeah. Three quick points. The book starts out by talking about how Trump is basically broken psychologically, and it's a result of his childhood. His father was, according to his niece, and his mother was so I don't know, intimidated, be a bully, or over it, or disgusted, or whatever, that in the summer when he came home from the military school that his dad dumped him in because he was uncontrollable. She went to Scotland, which is where she was from. She was a Scottish immigrant. The Trump men only marry immigrant women, it seems. And so it starts with there. Then the middle part of the book gets into this giant machine that these right-wing billionaires started building after Brown v. Board in the 50s, and then really, started expanding in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to basically take over the Republican Party and roll back the New Deal and the Great Society, and how Trump was the perfect vessel for that with Project 2025. And their plans to basically deconstruct New Deal and the Great Society, just end all, as many of those programs as possible, which Trump has already moved, rapidly. And then the third part of the book is, what happens in advanced countries and developed countries, because we're not we're not a banana republic, even though we're starting to behave like one.
Right.
What happens in developed countries when this kind of thing happens? And frankly, more often than not, the wannabe dictator loses. And
Oh,
so it's
that's good
kind of
to
an
know.
instruction manual on how to deal with that.
The Last American President, that's the full title, right? And it's
Yeah.
tomorrow. It's available. You can buy it
Yeah.
online now. Tom's got, he's holding it right now.
The subtitle is A Broken Man, a Corrupt Party, and a World on the Brink.
It's interesting that the middle part, the first part's interesting because I'm friends with Mary Trump. And, we've talked about her Uncle Donald many times, and it was in her first book, all about that. And I had someone on recently, I can't remember who, and they said to me, have you ever heard of the Powell memo? I'm like, have you ever talked to Thom Hartmann? Of course I heard the Powell memo. I'm like, how dare you suggest I don't know about the Powell memo, which I think I learned about from you years ago, and then I've read about and stuff like that. But it was funny that I was almost offended. How dare you? I speak to Thom Hartmann all the time. The Powell memo comes up in every conversation. And Reagan. Powell memo and Reagan. It all started with Reagan. So Tom's Substack, if you don't subscribe to it, please go subscribe to it. It's the Hartmann Report Substack. Let me look up the exact title here. HartmannReport.com. Just go to HartmannReport.com. Sign up. It's free, just like mine. Nothing behind a paywall. You can learn for free. It's fun. Learning is fun. Reading is fundamental. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for spending time with us. I really appreciate it.